So we have Latrinda Cheryl, who has been working with us, that will give some instructions on how we want to hear from you. And then last but surely not least, we have Samantha Murphy from DHS, who has, been instrumental in helping us, figure out how to navigate a lot of things that are happening countywide. And so we're fortunate to have her with us. So without, any more words from me, I would like to turn this over to Sarah and Kim to, give a brief introduction, and then to, kind of talk about how we got where we are. So Kim and Sarah.
Thanks, Kathy. Um, as Kathy said, I'm Sarah Goodkind, and with Kim Booth, who will talk in just a moment, we're the co-conveners of the BGEA Juvenile Justice Workgroup. I'm also a faculty member in the School of Social Work at Pitt, and I was thinking about that too. I think we've been doing this work together for at least 4 years now. When we started this work, one of the places we started from was by looking at the data. And one thing we saw was that Black youth in our city and our county are much more likely than white youth to be referred to the juvenile justice system at rates much more disproportional than nationally. And what we also saw was that behaviors of white and Black youth could not account for these differential referral rates. So what we knew then is that Black and white youth are being treated differently in our county, and that this is a manifestation of systemic racism, of how racism has been institutionalized in our systems. And what we wanted to do was come together to make these systems better for all young people, knowing that that will help to reduce this disproportionality and enable us to better support all of our young people. And I'm going to turn it over to Kim to say a little bit more about what we've been doing.
I think as Kathy mentioned, I hope you said Assistant Chief Probation Officer, Kathy, because my colleagues are texting me like Assistant Chief Probation Officer. So I'm just an assistant. I
That's
just
what
want to
I
make sure.
said, didn't I?
Okay,
I did.
I'm not sure. I'm just clarifying. I seen my colleagues texting me, so I was like, maybe somebody said something wrong. I don't know. But I'm glad to be here in this space. We have been meeting, much like Kathy said, for 3 years, but really we have been doing this work, I know, at juvenile court for a very long time. I'm so glad to finally get here today to finally talk about diversion. Sarah and I have co-convened the group for that long, and we have probably met at minimum once a month. It feels like for those 4 years, speaking to many of the stakeholders in the community about how do they see this issue, how do they are they even aware of it? How have they been addressing it, and what have we been doing thus far? And so finally, we get here today where we are now finally able to collectively engage in a process where we can look at how in Philadelphia they engaged in a process. Mr. Kevin Bethel was able to sort of make this transformation. And I just think the vision and how that sort of worked is something we can absolutely do here in Pittsburgh, here in Allegheny County. So I don't know. I guess I should I really be introducing Kevin. I feel like everybody knows him, but for those who don't, just like you seen when you were sent out the agenda, he is the special advisor and chief school safety in Philadelphia, and my colleague for many years, where we worked on disproportionate minority contact issues, specifically in our state committee work and in other works. So I know Kevin has been doing this work for a long time, is super invested in helping us or helping anybody get this job done. So without further ado, if Mr. Bethel could appear, it'll be like magic. Yes,
Yes, he's here. But
yes.
hello,
How are you?
how are you?
How's everybody?
We're good.
Okay.
So
Okay.
before you get started, I wanted to let Latrinda kind of give some uh, um, information about how we want the audience to engage. So Latrinda.
Yes, hi. Excuse me. Hi, everyone. I'm Latrinda Cheryl of Common Cost Consultants, and I am going to drop some thoughts for us in the chat. Would love for each of you to respond and just introduce yourself. And if you can, share one hope that you have for the end of the 2021 school year. Um, Thinking about what Kathy said, right? Transitioning from the hope of yesterday, right? If you can share one hope that you have right now for the youth in our region for the end of the 2020-2021 school year. Also, right, if you have questions for Mr. Bethel or Chief Bethel or any of the other panelists, feel free to use the Q&A panel and drop your questions there, and we will try to do our best to answer them as they come in. But engage in the chat, use the chat. We definitely want you guys to continue to interact throughout the conversation. Okay.
Thanks, Latrenda. So Chief Bethel, thank you for being here.
Okay. Are you going to? Okay. Somebody's gave me the screen already. I am.
Yep. So you should have, I made you a co-host. Yep. You have everything you need.
And this could be my start time. What time? I'm going to make sure I'm on schedule.
Yep. So you're scheduled to go. I don't even have my phone in front of me. So plan to talk for about 40 minutes or so.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Dr. Elliott and Kim and the entire team for giving me an opportunity to come and speak with you today. And so I'll begin the conversation kind of backing up a little bit is, I oftentimes, folks ask how I got to this space. So before I was sitting in the school district and overseeing the school safety, I was a deputy commissioner of the Philadelphia Police Department. I ran the patrol operations for the city. I served almost close to 30 years. The last 8 years, I ran all the patrols for the city of Philadelphia. I was, a large city, a large police force, almost 6,500, 7,000 officers. At the time, I had about 4,500 of them, and I oversaw all of the patrols, but also oversaw the school safety, and I also oversaw community relations and some other subgroups. And so I come to this space oftentimes very humbled because I am a guy for 29 years who spent a lot of time locking folks up, and in particular, young kids up, and really didn't take the time to really take a step back and see the impact my actions were having on young people. Over time, I would really begin to have a reimagining of my work. And how did I get there? In 2012, 2013, I was asked to be a part of an organization that was looking to change how to get law enforcement leaders across the nation to look at juvenile justice differently. And so I remember going to these events and talking about trauma, talking about the development approach, talking about adolescent development, and really not understanding any of it. Coming from a policing space, the policing space has always been about pull it up by your bootstraps. If I got out the community, why couldn't you? I'm raised by a mother who raised 4 boys by herself. And I came out of a tough neighborhood, a lot of violence, grew up poor, and I got out. So why can't these other kids get out? What I would learn over that time is I was fortunate and blessed that even though I came out of a single parent home, I had adults in my life, coaches, schools, sports. I had more than one caring adult. I had multiple caring adults and men in my life who helped me get through. And so in 2016, I started to go through this transformational process of what am I doing? 2014. So prior to that, I'm in these trainings. I'm starting to feel like I should be doing something different, and especially about young people. And so I started to focus my attention on school diversion and the school to prison pipeline. A phenomenal judge out of Clayton County, Georgia, sitting next to him, a Southern judge, kept nudging me in these rooms and saying, Kev, what are you going to do about the work you do in Philadelphia? You need to go back and look at the data. And so I did. In 2013, the latter part of 2013, leading to 2014, I look at this data. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen in the room, I tell you, the day I sat there and I pull up this data, and we're locking up 1,600 kids a year in my school district. Now, I'm a product of the Philadelphia school district system. And so I'm looking down on a sheet of paper and I said, I'm locking up 400 or 500 kids a year for disorderly conduct in the schools. And I'm looking at what they are. And I'm like, I did this in school. I mean, those usually was a after school suspension, or the assistant principal told you don't knock it off and don't do that again. What am I doing here? Locking up young kids coming into school with mace, young girls walking into school with mace, walking through the metal detector. And in our schools, all of our high schools have metal detector, and we would lock these young girls up for 6 hours in a cell block, fingerprinting and photographing for mace. And so it was one of the most disturbing incidents I had in my career, because I looked down on this piece of paper and I'll tell people the clearance rate for my locking up kids in school was 100%. The 1,500, 16, 1,700 shooting victims I had in the city was 20%, 45% for my homicides. What am I doing? And so I never took the time to look at the who, what, and when, and why of the school data and really give the men and women who worked under me the ability to do something different. And so part of this was a leadership issue. This wasn't a policing issue. This was a leadership issue. I remember the day I walked into Commissioner Ramsey's office, who I worked for, and I told him I can't do it anymore. I cannot lead an organization and lead the men and women who work for me who are locking up children in school for bull crap. Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about a kid who brutalizes a teacher or brutalizes another student. I'm talking about 10-year-old children who are getting locked up because they brought a butter knife to school, didn't realize because they got bullied the day before. So, ladies and gentlemen, it didn't make any sense to me. And so what I'll share with you in a very quick, and I know I'm going to do a much larger presentation next week, but we'll really get into the night, is really go through over the next 25, 30 minutes, just a kind of a quick snapshot of what does that look like? What did we do in Philadelphia to really change how we did our process? And one of the questions I always ask when I do these courses and if I was in front of you, and so just do a mental note for me now. You know, one of the things I ask, knowing what all of you know now, what you could have gotten arrested for. I often do that with my police chiefs when I'm doing training with police chiefs across the nation, sitting in the room, and I hand out these index cards. And I ask that question. I say, take an index card. And write on the index card, know what you know now. What did you do when you were a kid? Well, here's what they said. So this is the forum I did with a group in 2016 at a national forum. And these are police chiefs. And I asked them this question. This is a few of the snapshots of their cards. Criminal trespass, theft, disorderly conduct, took a pellet rifle to school, purchasing alcohol. What I got? Cops like to drink, so we know that's always going to be on there. Speeding, curfew, and false ID, the shoplifting, vandalism. And then I turned to them and said, but look where you are now. Look where you are now, leading organizations. And some of these men and women are leading large organizations in the nation. And so when you all are sitting in this room, in this conference today, and this quick presentation, think about that. Like, look where you are now. Most of us who have done stupid adolescent development things in my life, and I have done them, have aged out of that process and went on to do extremely well. We can't forget that, because what we have done, particularly in my policing space, is we start to lose that empathy, to build up that wall, to not deal with the trauma that we deal with every day. And when we do that, we stop empathizing with the people and the men and we serve. Because if I was in a larger presentation and I would show you a video, and I would show you a video of a young girl getting arrested for coming to school with a scissors. And we walk her through that process. And when we walk her through that process, we go into the cell block and we put her in the cell block and we fingerprint her and we photograph her and we put her back in the cell block. Because I wanted to show people, what is it like when it's one thing to say I want a child locked up, but what happens when we inflict that trauma at the time the girl in the video is 11-year-old? At the end, I step back and I tell people, well, that's my daughter. And when I shot that video with my daughter on a Saturday morning and just took her out with my team and we did a video of it, I struggled with that because I said, how in God's name would I allow that to happen to somebody's child? And I know what I would do with my daughter. If somebody called me and told me they locked up my daughter for coming into school with a pair of scissors. And so we have to really, really think about what are we doing to young people when we go through that process. And so as we move through this, I just want to start to share with you, what is the school to prison pipeline? And so for many of you on this call and many of you who are leading this work, Dr. Elliott and all the team who's involved with this, and Kim, is really, what is it? And we know we have the schools in this Federal Gun-Free Act that said there's no gun in school. Oh, I think we all agree that we don't want a real gun in school. When did a Cub Scout knife? When did mace? When did, hell, we were locking up kids, rocks in a sock. When did a butter knife? When did a box cutter that a kid uses for school? and I mean, for work after school become a prohibited weapon. And so we started to expand that. We're doing zero tolerance, and even during the time where we're instituting these guns issues around guns, we're practicing zero tolerance. From a policing perspective, I'm practicing the broken windows theory, and I'm telling my men and women to stop everything. The little stuff stops the big stuff, and so we take that approach in our schools. If we stop the small stuff, the big stuff will stop. Well, it doesn't happen, right? We add school police into our schools. We won't talk about persistently dangerous schools today. We start because now we're putting metal detectors in our school, and we're being more enforcement driven. And we're being very engaged, and we're also trying to deal with the issues around active shooters in our schools. We have harsh school disciplinary practices, and at the time in my school district, we've done an immense job. Dr. Height and his team has really reduced that substantially, but that's part of it. But arrest would be a part of the equation. And Kevin Bethel was in high school. I have never, ever saw a police officer come into my high school in one of the toughest areas in the city and lock up any of my classmates. And it sure as heck didn't lock us up for that knife we had in our back pocket. And sure didn't lock us up for the fight. And so in Philadelphia, zero tolerance. We have metal detectors in all of our schools. We have 320 school safety officers now. We've changed our name because we're a security force. We're supported by another 90 to 100 Philadelphia police officers. As I indicated, we have suspensions at the time when we're going through this process are pretty high. But here was the biggie as I let out in my conversation with you, 1,600 kids being arrested. And when I would challenge the system, if our arrest was working, then the numbers should go down. If I locked up 1,600 kids today, the numbers should go down. And so we weren't seeing that. We weren't seeing a downward trend because I'm blocking all these kids, and kids were learning through example that because I was arresting Kevin, that Mike won't do it. Kids are not wired that way. And when you understand the development approach, which I'm not an expert in, so I stay in my lane. I'm a guy who was a cop for 30 years, but part of my work was understanding the impact that me just trying to use kids as an example wasn't going to change that behavior. It wasn't going to do it, and it wasn't working. And so as we started to understand, I also started to understand the consequences of those arrests. So in addition to recognizing the trauma that is inflicted on a child when we arrest him or her, because I think all of you can sit here today and close your eyes and think about your 10-year-old, you being a 10-year-old or your 10-year-old child, and what would happen to them if I came to school and arrested them for disorderly conduct or coming into school with a small knife or a butter knife or locking up a young girl for mace. In addition to all of that trauma we inflict on them, the arrest in itself is a consequence. The adjudication process with them is a consequence. The probation, many of our kids will stay into the system. And unfortunately, some of the kids that we arrest in our school will ultimately wind up in juvenile placement. Many of them for some of the lowest offenses you can imagine who have never been arrested before, but because of this the downward spiral of this process, we duly inflict a significant amount of damage. So what does it look like when you change a system? What does it look like when you take a policy? And that's why I applaud all of you and the work that you're doing now. It is such amazing work that you're starting to embark on, because our work was a policy decision. It wasn't a legal issue. At the end of the day, we are law enforcement. I run the organization. I run the police officers who are in the field. I go to my boss and say, I'm not arresting. The power of arrest was mine. So part of what I'm going to show you now is what happens when you reimagine how my safety work works, understanding that I don't have to arrest a kid if I don't want to. And the DA's office, no one can stop me. No one can make me arrest anyone. And part of that was understanding no one was making me to lock up children. And if you look at the Safe School Act, it says the school has to notify the police department. It says nothing in there about I had to make an arrest. We kind of just created that. And so what we would do is empower ourselves to say, we're not going to do that. So we're 8th largest school district, as I indicated before. We have school safety officers now, 84 police officers who support that. And so our demographics of our school, 134,000 students, 1,600 arrests, 51% of our school district is African-American, about another 24% is Latino. But what our arrest, 80% of our kids. So the disparities in the system were pretty high. Now I'll be very frank, as you see, the majority of our system is African-American and Latino. So we are going to have a large percentage of our African-American and Latino students who are arrested. But the reality is also that we still saw disparities even in that process as many of our kids are spread across the school, and we really need to work to balance that process. So we set some goals. We're going to reduce our arrests by 50%. We're going to hopefully that goal of that was the school, improve the school retention. We have a researcher on board now who's evaluating all that, reducing our racial and ethnic disparities, which we have had an impact. But one of the big keys was to provide services, because on my patch and on my badge, honor, integrity, and service. Part of what we would now was engage ourselves in service. And so we would create a collaboration. Now I'll be very upfront, and I don't say this out of arrogance, so please don't take it that way, but I'm in the room and I'm not doing it anymore. And so part of that understanding was that when I come to my collaborating partners, I've pretty much made the decision that I'm not going to be arresting kids for coming into school, getting into fights, 300 or 400 arrests. I'm not going to arrest young kids coming into school for not a gun. If you come into school with, butter knives and all of these things that we were arresting them for, even BB guns. I got 10-year-old kids who go to a store down the street and they're selling lollipops on the counter and they're selling $2 BB guns. And my 10-year-old buys a $2 BB gun and walks into school with it, and he gets caught with it, and we're locking him or her up. No, we're just the store down the street. And so part of my collaboration you see here is really asking those partners, I need your help. And so all of those folks on the screen you see were my collaborating partners. I needed the support from the defender. They're going to represent those kids every day. What are the issues that you see behind the scenes? Behavioral health when it came to training. My JAD task force, Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative task force, because the leaders were there to help me. Drexel University, who's my researcher and has been researching our work for the last 6 years. The DA's office telling me, Kev, if you don't arrest them, then I'm not charging them. So you have the power, and making sure that I understood that. And the school district, my great partnership outside of the school district, but now working for Dr. Height, who was really working to change his code of conduct and was really looking to limit the number of kids we arrested in school. But my main partner here is the Department of Human Services. Department of Human Services, and when I start to show you, outline the program, are the ones who provide all the supports. So when we do what I'll talk about, a pre-arrest school diversion program, we're able to send those young people to programs in the community to get them the help that they need. So what does the process look like? If I put you back to 2013, this was our process. Officer, school district calls, my Philadelphia police officer respond, school safety officer in the school says I have a kid arrested, it was done. We didn't ask any questions. Listen, if the school's calling, they clearly want us to arrest them. And so we just followed suit with what they wanted to do. We would change that model and go to, hey, what are the offenses that we're not going to arrest a kid for? Disorderly conduct. We no longer arrest kids for marijuana, but our city changed, that's a code, that's a ticket now. Less than 28 grams of marijuana is a ticket in our city now. So, but when we started our program, that was still an arrestable offense. Coming to school, we would lock young people who got suspended and come back the next day for trespassing. And so we determine what offenses. We don't do serious offenses. So we don't do aggravated assaults. We don't do robberies. You can't beat another student. Where they're injured. You can't beat a teacher. But that's only a small, and we hold up the entire system because we don't want to let these kids go. But it only represents about 5%. And we still arrest those kids who engage in that more egregious behavior, but the percentages and the numbers are extremely small. So most of the offenses we divert for are summary and misdemeanors. We don't allow our officers, though, to make those decisions because we could not, across a system that has 240 schools and charter schools, allow them to make independent decisions. And so I know there's some goals that say you have to be discretion, but I couldn't deal with that issue because too many schools, too many officers, too much bias baked into the system. So when an officer comes to a school and we're going to do our pre-arrest diversion program, they make this determination. They walk into school and Kevin's been stopped because he has a butter knife in his pocket or she has mace. They call into our intake center. We have 2 police officers who do that, Philadelphia police officers. And the only question they ask them, one, what is the offense? And they tell them she has a mace. And then they look into the system. Our program is a first-time offender program. If the child has no other offenses, which 99.9% of my kids who get diverted do not, they tell the officer that the student is eligible. That officer, again, will give the chief a letter and the parent, because all the time the students may still get a suspension, and will let the student and the parents know that within 3 days, they're going to get contacted by DHS, Department of Human Services, and the police department, and they will schedule a visit to go to the home. It is not a dependency visit. It is to evaluate what services need. Our program is family-based, is there to support the student, but also see what the needs are. And as many of you know, once we get into the homes, and that was my biggest push. I've been in narcotics for almost 15 years. I knew it was behind the doors. If you want to help children, if you want to deal with their trauma, get into the home. And that's been one of the greatest assets of our program, because we're able to get in there and see grandmother who's raising 5 grandchildren and struggling to make things happen. And so they get referred to their community partner, a community program. We have 6 community-based programs. A child goes where he lives, not where he gets arrested. And in that program, he will stay 3 to sometimes 6 months. We've had kids who stayed a year. They were done in 3 months, but don't want to go home. And that begins our diversion process. And so we have 6 community-based program providers, as I indicated. What are they getting there? Part of the core elements of all 6 programs is to provide the things you see on the screen here. You know, that academic support. Many of them need mentoring. Listen, I tell people, you know, folks say, oh, well, you're this big, you know, I've done it all, ladies and gentlemen. I've been involved in shootings. I've ran over policing strategies. I've done all of those activities. You know, and so I understand, you know, why oftentimes people say, well, it's a, you know, this stuff doesn't work. I'm telling you, it does work, because part of the core of this work is really not being soft on crime, is really working with these young people to get them the supports they need. Some of these kids have never even had anybody tell them they love them. I mean, I got young people I could introduce you today that never thought they could go to college. Never even thought their belief is, I'm dying. I'm not going to be past 22. It needs oftentimes to build up their self-esteem, to build up them, give them the tools. How do I deal with anger? How do I deal when Kevin, you know, I mean, all of those issues that they deal with in their community. So as you see, there's a lot of programming here, and many of it can be tailored to the needs of the youth. You know, where mom's a single mother who's got this 6'3" son, and she just can't figure out, and he's not listening. You know, and so it's really important. These programs have been vital to the success of our work. And part of our work also links these young people to the services that they need. So if there's needs for food, clothing, you know, we've got into places where we're going with an addicted mother, you know, and so be able to get mom into counseling, and that ultimately results in mom being getting better, her getting better, brings the family back together. And so, you know, a lot of a percentage of our students have individual education plans. And so they already come sometimes with already underlying challenges. And we have our partnership through our programs for our children's behavioral health. So if kids have some mental health issues and other issues that are happening, kids with marijuana, addicted to marijuana. So 2 of our programs have drug and alcohol treatment to work with those young people. But I can't tell you what it's like to walk into the circle, and I'm not listening to the circle, but learn how so many of our, particularly our young girls, who are self-medicating because of sexual abuse or physical abuse. And even our young boys who are self-medicating with marijuana. Well, hey, I don't like Ritalin, so I smoke marijuana because that calms me down. Those are real stories, and those are reality of what we do. And so what does it look like when you change policy? Again, this was not an illegal change. It is an entity like yours saying, we don't want to do this anymore. Our first year, we're not going to arrest kids for these offenses. We dropped by 74%. The next year, 64%. The next year, 68%. And what is happening now is the culture is changing as well. You know, because at the same time we're diverting, our school district is also entering into positive behavior intervention supports. We're starting to add more restorative work, circles, and all of that other activity that's starting to kind of sandwich all of this together. You know, our 4-year, 456, and I didn't add that to my newest slide, but we've been down 84%, and last year we had 256 kids. So a system that services almost 200,000 students with 240 schools and another 60 charter schools only arrested 256 children last year. And so that's big, right? And that's where we are as an agency. And even going into this year, as we continue to expand our diversion, we'll be doing more. The blue represents the kids that we've diverted, but collectively, we've diverted almost 2,500 students into our pre-arrest diversion program. And I just want to make a quick note. We don't do arrest paperwork. We don't charge any fines or fees. We don't require the kids. So the children that we divert do not have to do anything other than participate in their program. They don't have to worry about going and getting their records expunged. They do not have a record. They do not have to go to any counselor, or when they fill out a form saying they were arrested, they are not arrested. And as you see, what happens when you make those policy decisions, immediate drop in disorderly conduct. And I can tell you right now, last year we maybe arrested 3 kids for disorderly conduct. Marijuana is off the charts, and we divert for marijuana. Weapons, we've only had 2 guns come into our system on average every year. The rest of the kids, we just recently made a decision that all kids coming into school, unless they come into school with a weapon, are being diverted. And we even created amnesty containers so they can drop anything they want in an amnesty container before they arrive. As you see, an assault on police, we really just stopped those kids. For assault on police, we stopped our officers from coming into the room for code of conduct issues. We do not permit our school safety officers to engage in situations where it's a code of conduct issue and does not rise to the need for security or safety officer or a police officer to engage. And as a result, we were able to limit those contexts, which reduced our assaults. And when we talk about the issue around race and who's diverted, the large percentage of our kids, as you see, are being diverted are African-American, Latino. And part of this process was that everybody in our system gets an opportunity. So this is not about arresting more white kids so the system balances or it looks good. The part of this is from a safety perspective that we want opportunities for all kids. So no matter what the gender, no matter what the race is, that they all are getting equal treatment across the board. One of the big issues that often comes up, well, hey, you're doing this diversion and kids are going to all want to get a one shot at it. That just doesn't happen. First and foremost, very few of our kids come back a second time. And moreover, this graph represents our incidents in schools have gone down. And so we're not seeing an increase. I can get into a fight and God get diverted. So I want one of those. That's just not what's happening in our system. And one of the beauties of our system in our first year data, and we have some more data that I'll probably share next week, but in our 1 year data, I mean, our kids are being arrested. So we have a control group. We have a group of kids that we are tracking who were arrested the year before we started our diversion program. Is 27% recidivism. For our kids who are being diverted, their recidivism is at 14%. But here's a big thing. In our diversion, 86% of those diverted kids remain free, right? So they're never arrested and they didn't come into the system. Where in our arrested category, all of those kids were arrested. For my data folks out there, I'm not a data researcher, but I felt that the research was important so that it wasn't just Kevin Bethel and the Philadelphia Police Department or any other entity, that we had an exterior entity. Really, is what we're doing right? Are we doing it in a proper way? Are we having the outcomes we're supposed to have? And so we do have a quasi-control study underway where we're looking at all of the entities, the juvenile justice system, the schools, whether the kids are participating, whether a program is better than another program. And we also most recently looking at the cost benefits of what we're doing. But when I look at the cost benefit, I tell people, and this is a week of Martin Luther King, the time, and it's a quote that he says, it says, the time is always right to do what is right. And that would carry through me in my career as I work through this process as well. What we're doing is right. Regardless of what anybody says, how much it costs, then what we're doing is right. Because I've seen enough of behind the system now, and I applaud the work of our juvenile justice workers and all the hard work they do. But the reality is, once they get into that space, 50% of it, so such a large percentage of our kids will never get out. And so it's just important for us as leaders to do that. And so one of the things as I start to wrap up is, what are we doing moving forward? So I have instituted, in addition to all the work we're doing, here in the city of Philadelphia, we've also instituted like a 5-pillar strategy. And I won't go into our 5 pillars, but the core of our strategy is restorative practices. So the pillar that drives our work as safety entities and as a law enforcement entities who support us is really making sure that our men and women are trained. So we're doing not just training for trauma, but we're within that, all of that training is around restorative circles. And so I have 50 or 60 of my men and women who are in a cohort now are being trained to do circles in their schools. And so they can turn those incidents into a circle with young people. That fight that we normally would arrest would go into a circle with those, but they'll be armed with the trainings and the tools around, conflict resolution and our safety cares program and all of those mentoring. We're training all of our staff on mentoring. And we have a quorum of men and women who are mentoring in our schools now, even in the virtual settings. So not only is it about a shift around not diverting, that's great, but we want to be better than that. We want to also be mentors to our young people. And we also wanted to be, in that space, because as I told many of my men and women, particularly my African-American officers, it's many of my young people, the first man that they will see when they come in the morning will be them, and how they treat them can have such an impact. But we're also doing, mentoring for our women. So we have a quorum of women now who are moving into the counseling stage and mentoring, because we do have our young girls who unfortunately do not have mothers in their lives who need those strong mentors. We created a youth court. So we have one youth court. We're doing community youth courts that we allow both, we use it for our work, but also allow the police department to use as we build out our model. We have one actually at our headquarters where we divert young people into our youth court. And I can tell you, anybody who, and I'm sure I have some youth courts folks on this call with so many people on, it is the best experience I've ever had. Young people, youth voice is the key to all of this. Young people know what to do with young people. And one of the things that I've seen was I sat in a youth court. So when I get a young man who walks into school twice with bullets in his pocket, in the past, we would lock this kid up and think the world is coming to an end. When you bring them into the youth court and the kids ask them just basic questions, and by the time they're done the questions, we find out that the kid carries bullets because his brother's been killed and he has another sibling been killed. And he figured if he has bullets in his pockets, the people think he have a gun and that would keep him safe. So that was his safety for him. And when we were able to peel it back, we were able to get to the root issues and deal with that. And so, and a big part of our work is really around expansion. So we're now, if you take the Safe School Act that kind of says that you have to notify for these offenses, well, there's a section of the Safe School Act that says that you're not required, that they're not mandatory reports, and that you have discretion. So we as a school district have decided that those offenses will no longer be for the police department. And so we were able to actually even get the Philadelphia Police Department to move into our building, into my office, where we run the diversion out there internally. And we will now be diverting those offenses in addition to the ones I described. So we will have, for the most part, most of our misdemeanors and up to including potentially a simple assault, depending on the level of assault, into our diversion model. And we think we are creating what we believe is a model that can effectively make sure that we respect our kids at where they are, understanding the trauma that they come through every day, also respecting the administrators and the staff that we work for, because, making sure that our employees understand, that the work we're doing, in essence, can help their system. And so we think collectively the work we're doing can have a significant impact, and it has. And I can tell you, in my 30 years of policing, there is nothing better I've done in my career than the work I do now in the youth space and the juvenile justice spaces. And when I travel both locally and nationally and work in my department as well, the goal is that we can change the lives of young people. And we do not need to be arresting kids in our school, particularly for these low-level offenses. So I appreciate, Dr. Elliott, the opportunity to do my rapid fire speed dating and take what will be a long presentation last week and kind of condense it into this smaller piece. But I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
Yes.
And Dr. Elliott, I missed one slide. I just want to read this to everyone real quickly, and just because it does summarize our program. This is a young kid, Malik Grant. I did a thing with the Washington Post one time, and he said, "I didn't want to get put away. You can't come back after that. You got a record, and people look at you differently. At the police school diversion program, the counselors I had were awesome. They wanted to see us succeed." And so I always end with Malik because he just was the representative of who we are in our work. And I think his words as a young person eloquently captured what we were trying to accomplish. So now I will stop.
Awesome. I think we do have a couple of questions here. Let me start my video. We have a couple of questions here. The first question is, was it hard to get the schools to buy in? Do you all get involved before, and do you all get involved before behavior issues start? So 2 questions, but can you talk through the process of getting the buy-in from the schools to do this work this way?
Yeah, so I think I said it, I moved so quickly, but at the beginning, it was really about policing buy-in, right? It really was a policing issue. Early in my first, I guess, step into this place was, what am I doing? From a police inspector perspective, right? When did I give up? I've often told my police officers that arresting somebody and taking somebody's freedom is a very, very powerful piece. Like, when did I give that up? Like, when did I give it up to say that someone from someplace else can tell me to lock this child up and never question that? And so part of that transformation was us as an agency to take that back and say, well, wait a minute. And so it wasn't hard to get the buy-in, because at that point, when they were telling me that they're going to arrest him, I was going to make a different decision, say that I wasn't. And I was going to move that kid to Diversion. So, but I will tell you, and that's why I think I told Dr. Elliott how much I respect your process, because I did make some mistakes in that though. I was going to make a hard culture shift and turn it in the middle of the ocean. I wasn't going to wait for testing this and we're going to try it here. To me, it was just too bad. And so I made a policy decision. And because I was sitting in a place where I could write policy and execute it, I executed. And so I made some people angry in that process, right? Because the school was, in many places, were not prepared. Oh my God, what's going to happen now? And so, so it wasn't hard to get to school because I didn't have to ask the school, because they didn't have the authority to arrest anybody. I did. But now I do. I've worked over the last 4 years to mend those fences. And now that I'm on the inside of the system, there is a lot of work being done on the front end of the system before the kid even gets to that place now. And we are working with our climate staff, and we are doing a lot of restorative work, a lot of, we have a program, Healing First, where we circle work. And even with the PBIS, I have my officers actually in a program learning about PBS and PBIS, positive behavior interventions and support, and how we can connect to that, and how we can be a part of those tiered approach. So we're much better as an organization. And so we're able to do multiple layers before a kid even is going to be referred.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question here. What policy shifts do you think need to occur on the federal level for this work to take shape across the country? Thinking about the fact that we have a new administration, but are there any policy shifts that you think people should be advocating for nationally that can help this work move along?
Well, I can say one of the beauties of the policy shift, and it was ironic. I left the police department. I was a fellow for 3 years, a Stoneleigh Foundation fellow, where I was able to travel around the country trying to do what I'm doing now, changing minds, right? And telling folks that it's okay and to do a second chance, right? And then unfortunately, with the administration change, all of that went away, right? I started a nonprofit to really, really immerse myself into that space. And by the time I start my nonprofit, where'd everybody go? And so I'm hopeful from the federal perspective that once this administration changed, and from my colleagues in OJDP and others, that they're going to restart the school collaborative and a lot of the funding. And there was so much energy. I mean, had we kept the course, I don't think we would be here where we are now, right? But because we got away from, so getting back on the track is going to be key for the federal government to come in now and offer those grants and the funding and restart all of the schools collaborative and working with the agencies out there across the stream, because it's a judge issue, it's a lawyer issue, it's a community issue. I think that's a big, but I don't me personally, the things that we're seeing in our communities and our counties are ours. It's not the feds. I mean, right now we have a state policy that says it's mandatory for you to call the police if a kid walks in there with that. Well, that starts our problem. And I'm on the governor's juvenile justice task force, and that's what we're looking at now is how do we tweak these policies so we don't also lay on school districts, because we tell them you have to call police. And now some places are very, understand how to manage that. But unfortunately, we also have a system that seems to force. And then why are we getting such a disproportion of our kids of color who are the ones who are coming into the system? And when you look across the counties, you can see the disparities. And so I think our issue is a local issue. It's a county issue. It's a policy issue. We do not have to lock up a kid for a number of offenses if we say we don't want to do it. And it's just taking the courage. And it's not a weakness, it's courage, right? It's the courage to say we're going to stop doing what we used to do and we're going to do something different for our children. Especially in our program where it's a first-time offender. But as I indicated before, I rarely get the second offender. Most of my kids are arrested coming into the metal detectors and they have marijuana. And and so I think it's a really, what you're doing now, like I said, I'll continue to champion is because that's where the real work is. Community and all the partners getting together and saying, you know what, we want to do something different for our children. And here's what we're going to do.
Awesome. There are a couple of questions here. specifically around which group, which part of the system, right, was the most difficult to, gain buy-in from, and then also like, thinking about your colleagues in the police department, what were some things that you did to change their attitudes and beliefs? So, like, just talk us through what this buy-in process looked like for
Yeah,
you.
yeah. So I'm a bottom up individual. I believe that real work happens at the bottom, right? Even though I've been blessed to sit in these executive levels. So when I did our program, I brought my men and women into the room. It was 94 Philadelphia police officers who were responsible for arresting kids in our system, and I presented them this program. I got this idea. And so I present the program to them. And before I do that, I give them the why, right? I have Dr. Goldstein, who's working with from Drexel. She does a presentation around adolescent development and all of those things to kind of get them into that space. And then I explain to this is the program I'm going to do. Um, and, and during that conversation, I realized I failed them because as a leader, I didn't give them any other tool but to arrest. Sometimes you're surprised. Like you ask the cop to come to school, he comes with the handcuffs and all that, and we're surprised he makes an arrest. That's what he's trained to do. She's trained to do, right? And so part of that was my recognizing how I failed them, because when I talked about this program. I said, well, listen, I'll get back to you, but here's my number if you have any issues. Listen, the next week my phone rang off the hook. I got this 10-year-old. I thought you were going to start this program because I don't want to arrest them. They were tired. They literally were tired of the arrest, of taking children out of school. And so part of that was really listening to them, explaining to them the why, give them the training around trauma and those other issues so you can kind of peel them back a little bit. But I can tell you the program started in 2014 with a notepad and a cell phone. The program I just described right here today, ladies and gentlemen, started with a notepad, a cell phone, an empty room with some chairs, because they put so much pressure on me that they were so tired of arresting kids that they said, I want to stop. And so part of that is really getting down to the ground, because they need cover. And I've shared this before. What you cannot do is say, a car officer, go in, take the knife and walk out. Well, he or she says, wait a minute, if he stabs somebody tomorrow, I'm going to. So part of what I was doing too was giving them cover. They're saying, hey, here's a program. You can divert this kid. He's going to go into the program. If you do all that, you're good. No matter what he does, our collective MOU, the DA's office signed it, Kevin Bethel signed it, the police department signed it, the superintendent Height signed it. So we all said we agree. So that if something happened, we all accept that as part of the process, and it doesn't sit just on that police officer. So that buy-in was very important. But as it relates to the most difficult part of the group, it wasn't the police officers. I'll be very honest with you, it was some administrators in the school system, because they had been, many of them, just like my cops, come old school. Kid acts up in school, this is what I do. I remember getting a call from a guy who wants me, a principal wants me to lock up a 10-year-old because he has one of the little, lipstick tasers, my cops are calling me from the scene. I'm like, yo, what are you talking about? I'm not locking the kid up. Well, and he's adamant. And I'm like, listen, what you could, no. And so part of it was but part of that was again, that goes back to my earlier comment, where I had the hardest the conflict was where I failed to do a very good job of communicating. And so I didn't do what you're doing here, right? I didn't really bake it in, right? And so I just made a hard stop. So part of that conflict was I created. And so it was been a challenge to do that, but over the time I've been able to work, and my principals now start to understand it better and understand what the program can do. So that was probably my greatest rub, but part of that was my fault. A large percentage of that was my fault.
So we have a couple of more questions here. Want to make sure we can get to our other presentation, but totally, people have lots of questions. So what recommendations do you have for school districts that are situated within many communities and deal with multiple local police? Basically districts that do not have a school police force, and then they're also dealing with multiple police.
Yeah, and that's a problem I also encountered when I remember I was in Kentucky and I went to a school district, and I think I had 10 different police officers in the room. And so oftentimes I often say that, part of that is getting those folks in the room. Oftentimes a judge, the county judge, can be that champion for you, because we, from policing, we've been trained all our lives to respect the court, respect the judge, right? And so oftentimes, if you can find that judge in that county who says, listen, I know there's 20 police officers, police agencies in here, but here's what we're doing. Right away, that gives them cover. The judge says, right? And so oftentimes, I think that centrally person, who oftentimes is the judge, and bringing them in as a collaborating partner can really, really be the game changer, especially when you're looking at a multi-police jurisdiction. But oftentimes, and if that doesn't work, then it's really someone that champion, right? That whether it be the superintendent of that school or one of the peers of that group who has enough of can bring that group together to say, hey, listen, we're in the room. And I often tell people, my stuff looks big on paper, 1,600 arrests drop, down to 200 something. But my big was big of disorderly conduct, right? Big on kids coming in with mace. And so I often tell counties, sometimes you just have to start small to get people kind of understanding what it all is, right? So sometimes you don't have to take it all. Hey, just say, it's Pittsburgh, you're gonna do disorderly conduct. I'm not sure what your disorderly conduct rest of it, all right, maybe 100, okay. And then you move to, after everybody started to get the energy going, you're like I am now, just expanding, and it starts to people to settle in.
Okay, and last couple questions. If an incident doesn't involve mandatory reporting under state law, could you just restate whether or not your police are still involved? And then why wouldn't the school police keep these situations out of the hands of police in the first place? So just to clarify, right? I mean, I think you spoke about this. If an incident doesn't involve mandatory reporting under state law, do you have the school district call police? Do you respond to those things?
So in our system, we did, right? So in our system, prior to me coming into where I'm working now, we saw it, even though it said the two, it was all lumped together. I think what happens, people don't, it just runs all together. They stop looking at the list. For example, threats are on that list. Now, so a kid comes to school and says, I'm going to blow up the school. I have a 10-year-old who comes into school and says, I'm going to blow up the school, and he can't blow up nothing. He don't have no explosive anything. So guess what we did with that kid? He's locked up because, everybody shudders in their boots. And so we created now a threat assessment team based on what the state requires, but we now create a response protocol to that. So my team goes out and evaluates that. Is that a real threat, a transient threat? Does the kid need services in the school, diversion? And so we now took that out, another 50 or 60 kids who would get arrested a year, and now move that into a diversion model. And so to answer your question, it really takes, to say you don't have to call for that, but it is a culture shift. Part of it is, if I locked up everybody I saw in policing, every time I walk down the street, I would never be in the street. I could arrest people for everything under the sun. At some point, it has to be, and so I think that gets codified in your MOU. So there's no questions. I think it's too much, oftentimes, discretion. And so as you're looking to put your MOU together, that's what we would spell out. These are the things that you don't arrest for. Everybody understands that. And then as you expand that, okay, these non-mandatory. So when we go back and redo our expansion of our diversion, that's what we're doing. We go back to our MOU and we add these now. We will not call the policing for these cases. But just be mindful, though, it may be, right? There may be a kid who's been locked up for a second assault. That may be your threshold. The first time offender, 2 kids get in a fight. Because even when you look at the data, and I think it's so important, the data, and look at those files, because the data tells the true story. And when you peel them back and you say, listen, Kevin got into a fight with Harold. I came to Harold to beat him up, and then Harold beat me up, and then I'm locking up Harold because I got a black eye. So since you saw mine, he got locked up for assault, a simple assault, even though I started it. And so it really, I think those are the things that you'll go through when you do this next iteration of what you do, and you decide what you want to do. You can put in there and say, hey, a first-time offender for these non-discretionary offenses will not be arrested, because there's stuff in there. There's thefts in there. The kid's not going to be able to steal all day, every day, right? There'll be those thresholds that you can develop. But I think that'll be a part of the conversation that the team will have.
Awesome. Okay. So I think the last couple questions will maybe send to you.
Okay.
Definitely want to give time for the other half of our program. So we thank you, Kathy. I don't know if you want to introduce the next speaker.
I do, and I just want to say thank you to Chief Bethel, and just appreciate your wealth of knowledge and really your offer and commitment to helping us address some of the issues that are occurring in our system, that we can have numbers that reflect the work that you have been doing. So thank you very much. I know that there are questions about the process, like how do you get the youth to trust this process? How do you get families and community members to engage in this process? Like, and I know Samantha had a question about how do you, what does a home visit look like? What did you? And so I think that those are a lot of questions that will be answered next week, because I know you had said that you was going to have your people from DHS, come on potentially and be here. But if you could take some time to, you have access to the Q&A to specifically answer those questions, but we also may have more time at the end of the PFT's presentation for you to also chime in and answer those questions. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.
So I will try to transition us right into the work that is happening here in Pittsburgh. And specifically, oftentimes the entities that get left out of this conversation are the teachers and the administrators and just what's happening within the school district. And so a few months back, or I should say weeks back, when the PFT released their report, which I believe all of you should have gotten a copy and were able to review, that recommended two top recommendations that align with the work that we're working on and recommending in the change to occur, is focused on similar to what Chief Bethel has been talking about, is diversion and also restorative practices. So I'm going to introduce Nina Esposito, the guidance, to kind of just say a welcome and give us some background of like how they got to where they are, and then she'll introduce the people that represent the PFT and that will be giving their presentation. Nina, thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you so much, Chief Bethel. That was I can't wait to learn more and pick your brain next week also, because we certainly want to learn from you. And that is one of our recommendations in our book. I'm glad you all have gotten that, because I'm so proud and happy to be here with you today to highlight some of the very fine work of the 3,100 members of the Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers and some of our leaders who are here with us today. And as you know, as Kathy said, we recently worked with the American Federation of Teachers to publish the book entitled, that many of you have, School Safety and Beyond. And we focused on a lot of our past efforts and initiatives that we're very proud of. And we wanted to provide recommendations to strengthen and build upon a lot of our past efforts and works, and to keep building on things that we know are good for kids, like community schools, like our rich early childhood programs, like varied and career and technical educations, and like what Kevin Bethel was talking about, and it got me so excited. I want those programs here in Pittsburgh, and we are passionate about it, and we have some people here. We can't wait to get them here in Pittsburgh. And I want to turn it over quickly to some of our leaders to talk about it. First of all, we have one of our vice presidents, Bill Heilman, to talk about it, and one of our executive board members who is with us here today, Rob Mitchell, and I'm going to turn it over to them to talk about those, and then we have some others to talk about you. So Rob and Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Nina. I too, I'm really excited. I was just, so thrilled to hear Chief Bethel and what he, the story so far that he expressed regarding Philadelphia. And at the same time, I mean, my heart was beating because there's so many things that we want to share about Pittsburgh. We're not in the same place, and I'm not sure we started in the same place, but we certainly have enough overlap that some of the things that have happened regarding citations and arrests in Pittsburgh that certainly need to be addressed. I think that we are. I mean, I just want to let you know the PFT, the leadership of the PFT, and many of the members, some of them that you'll meet today, we're in it for this work. We are committed to restorative practices and restorative justice working in Pittsburgh public schools so that all our students, come to safe, welcoming places where they're treated with respect and they receive a high quality education. And when they do engage in misconduct, that there's a pathway for restoration, not just punishment. So with that is our view, and you're going to hear a little bit about that today. When I first presented this, I have to admit, I took things from the Black Girls Equity Alliance report, and I took things from some of the Philadelphia stuff that you can find, that Mr. Bethel is the source of, a major source of, and I put together a little, a few slides to do that. And I feel sheepish about doing that today, but instead of feeling sheepish about it, I'm just going to show you what I put together for this. And please think of it more as an honor to your work, Sarah Goodkind, and also Chief Bethel. It's not that I'm trying to steal it from you. It's that I really appreciate it, because there's a couple things that happen, and well, we all know in 2020, a lot of things happened, for goodness sake, but some things that were, so powerful in terms of what happened nationally and locally, that we just cannot ignore. It's just impossible for anyone who has some ability to make a change to not use that. So I'm going to share my screen and just go through what I put together, and I'll do this really quickly because I know you want to get to Rob and restorative practices, and also Harold and the panel. But your wonderful report that that's on your website, I pulled out this slide because I think this one got our attention, as well as all the other statistics. That if you have a normal distribution of similar U.S. cities, Pittsburgh is way over on the tail in terms of the rate of referral of Black girls to law enforcement. So it's not just that that there are things that are happening because of systemic racism and cultural, the existence of certain kind of cultures and climates in urban school districts. It's that Pittsburgh has, we're out there, and that should get our attention, because even being in the middle of this distribution in terms of racial disparities, even if we were in the middle, that would not be good. But being so far to the right on the distribution should get our attention. Now, I do want to say that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of good things going, both in our safety department, and the trend is definitely in the direction of ending arrests and citations and dealing with the issue of disorderly conduct being used almost at will. But I think that, the police officers can describe whether that's really the case here. The other thing that got our attention, and this is, of course, taken from Philadelphia. You've seen the slide. I think Mr. Bethel had a one or 2 years farther out. And so the success of Philadelphia got our attention, and we want this to happen here too. And some of it is, and our police officers can tell you. We went through in our presentation the process that Chief Bethel also already told you, so I won't spend any time on that. But the thing that I thought was really interesting in the data was, in your experience, how is the diversion program affecting school safety? Now, the people who are answering this question are Philadelphia police officers. And so if you look at a little better and much better, So early on in this process, the police officers were already saying that a diversion program was affecting school safety in a positive way, where more than 3/4 of them were saying that. So those statistics there are, just those alone have to get the attention of anybody who cares about the children that Pittsburgh Public Schools serves. And our educators and the other people in other roles are also among those who certainly care about what happens with our girls. So you got our attention, and we're now going to make the difference. The last thing that I want to say, because I want to move quickly so that you have time for the practitioners, is it's a statistic that I learned not too long ago, and I had to go and double check it on a calculator to make sure it was right. But from the time a person is born until they're 18, if you just count their waking hours, 16 out of 24 hours in a day, if you just count their waking hours and ignoring sleep, only 15% of a person's waking hours are in school. I thought it would be more than 15%, but if you take the 180 school days and put 7 hours in there and do the math for 13 years out of 18 years, there are a lot of things that happen in our lives from the time we're born until the time we're 18. And our schools have a heavy responsibility. We need to educate kids first and foremost, of course, but we have a lot to do in terms of all these other things. That's why PFT is so committed to community school model, restorative justice, as well as a high quality education. And our report has 8 sections to it. And there's 8 sections to it because no one thing is going to be the answer. We have to have a holistic solution to what's happening to so many of our young people here in the city of Pittsburgh. And it's going to take more than a union or a school district. It's going to take community organizations. It's going to take parents. It's going to take the city of Pittsburgh. It's going to take the county. We're going to have to do this together. So with that, what I'm going to do is, and this is really, it even gets better. I'm the low point in this presentation. I'm telling you right now, this is going to get better. So I'm going to turn it over to Robert Mitchell, who is going to talk about restorative practices in Pittsburgh Public Schools.
Thanks, Bill. Hello, everybody. Good evening. In addition to implementing the citywide diversion program, another key component is strengthening and expanding our restorative justice programs. And Chief Bethel hit on this as well as one of his priorities. By definition, restorative practices are inclusive, non-punitive ways to respond to conflict and build community. They replace harsher policies such as suspensions and expulsions by working with students and stakeholders to address the causes behind students' negative behavior and implement strategies to help students learn more positive actions and reactions. So restorative practices also help to foster positive relationships between students and educators and facilitating communication among students, educators, and parents. In addition, it helps to improve school climate. So just so you know, research shows that when restorative practices are implemented with fidelity, suspension rates decrease, school culture improves, student engagement increases, and graduation rates rise. On the contrary, in the absence of restorative practices, more punitive policies such as suspensions and expulsions are used to respond to conflict, often with very different results. Students who are suspended don't often get to think through, learn from, or move beyond negative behaviors. And when they're removed from the classroom, they miss out on instruction, which often results in them falling behind academically and being even more isolated from the school community. So when they return to the classroom then, they often feel lost or unable to catch up, which in turn can result in them acting out, disrupting class, and facing even further disciplinary action. So now, if the cycle of punitive discipline repeats without the students receiving support to help them to improve and get to the root of the problem, the likely result is that the student feels that nobody cares, or adults are the enemy, they're bad kids unable to break a negative cycle. So the preferred choice is clear. Restorative justice programs have shown the kind of results that we want, improving students' academic, social, and emotional outcomes, and improving school climate, while also helping to avoid these much less desirable outcomes that come from more punitive approaches like suspensions, expulsions, and as the chief mentioned, the zero tolerance policies, which disproportionately affect students of color and students with disabilities. According to data from the US Government Accountability Office, 39% of students suspended from school are Black, while they make up only 15.5% of students in the nation. Also, around 26% of suspensions are of students with disabilities, while they make up only about half that number, 13.7% of students. So where are we in Pittsburgh Public Schools? Well, in 2014, Pittsburgh Public Schools was awarded a $3 million grant from the Department of Justice to implement restorative practices at 22 randomly selected Pittsburgh Public Schools and adopted the IIRP Safer Saner Schools Whole School Change Program in order to implement restorative practices. The district also contracted with the RAND Corporation to evaluate and report on the impact of restorative practices in some Pittsburgh Public Schools, highlighting implementation of restorative practices as a part of the Pursuing Equitable Restorative Communities, or PERC study, during the school years from 2015 to 2017. As of December 2018, the PERC study found that the rate of suspensions in Pittsburgh Public Schools decreased, particularly for female students, elementary students, students from low-income families, and Black students. However, the study found that academic outcomes did not improve, nor did suspensions for middle school students, nor nonviolent offenders. So while there is clear evidence that restorative practices could make a difference in Pittsburgh Public Schools, for restorative practices to work, there needs to be a greater commitment on the part of all stakeholders than what previously existed. With robust restorative practices programming, we can create a sense of community in schools where relationships are valued, individuals participate in their own accountability, trust is built, and reconciliation replaces exclusion. This requires resource investments and an ongoing commitment to restorative practices. Strong restorative justice programs will entail a process in which the school community develops itself and invests for the long term. And here are some key recommendations. One is to hire a restorative practices coordinator for every school and provide that individual initial and periodic training in the advancements of restorative practices. Providing a monthly school-based professional development is also a key component on restorative practices to the school staff, with a significant part of this facilitation being done by the restorative practices coordinator. Also, providing a restorative practices room at every school that serves as a de-escalation room for students who are disrupting learning and need to leave the classroom, where the restorative practices coordinator is often in the room. And also, it's recommended to appoint a district union task force on restorative justice to help support restorative justice implementation and gauge progress. Now, at the building level, with PPS allocated funding, school communities could submit proposals of their restorative justice plans for whole school community implementation, along with appropriate staffing and scheduling, revamping of restorative justice programs in maybe 10 schools to start. This recommendation models necessary buy-in for implementation of restorative justice with fidelity. In other words, a school site restorative justice proposal produced by a school-based team of stakeholders, including educators, parents, students, and administration. And with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Harold Grant. who I think is
Yeah, I'm
going.
trying to click over. Hey, how's everyone doing this afternoon? Again, thank you for joining us. I'm the moderator for this portion of the presentation. I'm a staff representative for the Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers. And before we get to our panelists, I would like to introduce them to you. First, we have our two school police officers, Officer Diane Davis and Officer Mike Boback. And for our two educators on restorative justice, you've already met Mr. Robert Mitchell of Pittsburgh Classical. And I just want to introduce you to Doreen Allen of Faison Elementary. So I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to jump into some of the questions. So first, I'm going to ask two questions of our officers. So if Diane and Mike could make themselves available. You heard of the pre-arrest diversion program in Philadelphia. What do you think of it from the Pittsburgh angle?
On the Pittsburgh angle, Harold, I believe it's a good program, listening to Mr. Bethel put it forth. I believe we started some of this using officer discretion, and we've actually, aren't really charging for marijuana anymore. But I do believe the Philadelphia is built up on more, and the services they will provide to the students. I don't believe we do that as well as they do right now, and I would look forward to having that done.
Okay, Diane.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I think it would be a great program for us to implement here in Pittsburgh. I'm excited. I think I'll tone it down a little bit for my first, but I am excited and looking forward to implementing this program and being a part of it.
And while I have you, Diane, regarding Pittsburgh Public School students you've known and you've worked with, what types of real things are those students facing?
Unfortunately, when they come to us, some of them are dealing with issues and matters at home in the process of before they even reach our doors. They may have dealt with some form of abuse, sadly to say. Some are dealing with homelessness, peer pressure, relationships, mental, physical, sexual abuse, and have been traumatized. And it's unfortunate, but the staff that we have in our safety division, I know I could speak for 98.9% when I say we care and we are excited to finally be sitting at the table to be able to address the matters from our perspective, because when the students enter that door, we are one of the first people that they see. And sometimes a smile, a hug, a handshake, a hello, a dance, a song changes the students' behavior, change their mind, may relax them. They're coming to a safe place. You know, here's cool security, here's cool school police. I can't put in the words how excited and how honored I am to be finally sitting at the table to speak on our behalf, to address what we know that the students are going through. Now we're all coming to the table to say, okay, we've seen, we've heard, we've dealt with, now let's do it collectively. And I am looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Mike, is there anything you wanted to add about the real life things that the students are facing?
No, that's Diane hit on the nose. I mean, abuse, poverty, disabilities. I mean, it hits. And like I said, I believe this would be a good, strong program to help out with all that stuff. and not having to put them into the justice system would be great.
Okay, thank you much. Hey, and now I'm going to switch to our restorative practices people. And Doreen, I'm gonna start with you because we haven't heard from you yet. I again, mention your school Phase-On, and what are the restorative practices that you are using in Phase-On? And can you describe the benefit of using restorative practices?
Okay.
Doreen, oh, there you are. I don't hear you.
Yeah, thanks again, guys. I appreciate you having me on me. I think Chief Bethel really hit the nail on the head with a lot of things. One of the things that struck me was that he asked the question, have you ever? And I usually start off when we were building our restorative work here at Phase-On. We're a K-5 school, the largest one in the city of Pittsburgh. I started off with a question that I asked the students, and then I shared it with the staff. And that question was, if you only knew. And with that question, kids answered that question, and it was so heartfelt. You know, if you had a heart, there wasn't a dry eye in the PD, because students really answered that question with honesty and with an open heart. And a lot of it showed teachers and our staff members that, hey, wait a minute, we really don't know what's in front of us until we get to know our students. And so you have to make those connections before you make content happen in our schools. But it has been very beneficial to us. You know, it wasn't a complete buy-in in the beginning, because it wasn't looked at as it was looked at as this is just another program, one more plate to spend. So, and I believe Chief Bethel brought this up, that it is a mindset change. You know, so as we started our journey, we realized that we empowered our kids. And once they began to realize they have a voice, we started building that network of social capital, which, you know, involved our students, our staff, the families, our community partners. And then kids really start to realize how we could separate that deed from the doer, and then we can start to repair harm. And kids weren't being sent home as much. And Diane, she's one that shows up at our schools a lot. She can say, she knows she's walking into a restorative school. And so we're not really asking for anything except for some understanding. And so that we can get our kids back into the classroom. So it has been what I call a game changer, restorative practices, because it really begins to level the field in discipline and how we discipline our kids, and giving them an opportunity to have the same benefits and privileges of kids that are not children of color. So.
Thank you. And Rob, what would adequate investing and better implementation look like in not just your school, but the entire district?
Well, definitely it would involve the district providing more training and support to make sure that we can standardize a high level of restorative practices across the district. You know, sometimes it can be spotty depending on the ability of the learning environment specialists or the people on the ground. So making sure that everybody gets the adequate training to make sure that if we invest in the training, the staff is ready to make the kinds of affective statements and the kinds of programming to be able to ask the right questions and approach with the proper affect in order to build the relationships with the kids. Because it all comes down to working those relationships. I really think that at the heart of restorative practices, what we're talking about is building relationships with kids and building mutual understanding so that we can grow together moving forward.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you very much. And I'm going to give you guys a break for now. I'm going to go back to our police officers, Diane Davis and Mike Boback. And I want to know, and I want the people to know, do you think students and their families would choose to be involved in a pre-arrest diversion program after an incident here in Pittsburgh Public Schools?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I guess I was trying to unmute my mic.
That's all right. Do you think that students and their families would choose to be involved in a pre-arrest diversion program after an incident?
I mean, I do, Harold. I believe that the students in Pittsburgh Public Schools and the parents will want to be involved in this. And then the reason being, it would give them some supports to help them out, and also keep them out of the criminal justice system and keep them out of that and for down the road.
Okay, thank you. Diane?
Yes, I do believe that they would want to be a part of the program, the pre-arrest diversion program. Yeah, I think they would.
All right, well, okay, because you think they will, in what ways, if any, would a strong pre-arrest diversion program affect your role as a police officer?
I don't believe a strong program would affect my job as a police officer. My first foremost part of my job is to keep the students and staff safe in the school. So that's not going to change. And also, I think it will give us more positive interactions with students if we were able to divert them to a program that stops them from going into the system.
And Diane, I didn't want to cut you off. Is there something you wanted to add?
No, we're okay.
All right. I just didn't want. I didn't want you to think I was putting you to the side. Never would I ever do that.
No, I wouldn't.
All right. So it would not affect you all that much, but how would a strong pre-arrest diversion program serve our students and our school communities?
I believe it would be something positive. I'm honored that we are all coming together to try to start this pre-arrest diversion program. And we're bringing in more people and we're opening ourselves up. So people understand what we do and how we do, and that we're not just writing citations and charging students just for being in the hallway or things of that nature. I know there have been some misunderstandings, and hopefully doing this pre-arrest diversion program, we'll all get a better understanding of each other's position. That goes for administration, social workers. All of us play a part in this program. And then to reach out to the community resources, I think that's phenomenal to be able to present that to the families, because as the chief that we just spoke with, I'm sorry, his name escapes me at this time.
Bethel.
But to provide resources for families that we know are struggling, and we see the kids that, as they come through the doors and throughout the day, to be able to look a parent in the face and say, you know what, instead of doing charges or anything of this nature, how about we have this program that we can present to you? And I feel that it's gonna. I'm just ready. I don't know how to put all these words. I'm just ready to go. You already know I'm ready to go. I've been ready to go since I read.
All right. Hey, officers, Davis and Bobak, thank you so much. I'm going to go back to our restorative practice people real quick. So, question for Robin. She's going to be mad at me in a second. Doreen, I was getting ready to call her by her other name, but that's all right. We all family here. Speaking of families, how would restorative justice programs benefit students and their families?
Rob, you want to start or you want me to start?
No, you go first, Doreen. Thank you.
Yeah, because, I'm here every day where the rubber meets the road. Families appreciate having the opportunity to come to the table and really take aim at the heart of the issues. So a lot of times we're not just fielding issues that happen in schools, we're fielding issues that happen outside the school, and it rolls into the school. So parents know now, based on our track record with restorative practices, that they can come to the school and get things straightened out if they're having a beef rolling in over the weekend because kids were on video games playing and they got into an argument, parents get into arguments. They feel the school's a safe place to come and actually have a restorative conference or restorative circle, and we can get to the heart of the matter so that everybody can go back into the community and live respectfully, hopefully, and safely. So that's one of the ways that they benefit. The other ways is that it becomes a tool for teachers to actually benefit with our kids, benefit in making strong connections with our families, staff, even staff members that have had issues with each other. We have restorative conferences with staff members so that we can keep everybody on the same page and feel like that they have a comfortable place to come to and work. There's a lot of benefits to it. And I know we talk about circles all the time, but there's actually 11 elements to restorative practices. And one of my favorite ones to really implement is the FAIR process. And Rob, I'm sure you know a lot about the FAIR process, but FAIR process has 3 key elements. And one of those elements is the engagement part. And that's where you allow people to have voice in the process, even, so that you bring the offender and the victim together and they have this engagement. And then we have an explanation as to why we made the decision that we made. It doesn't mean there's not going to be a consequence. But then after that, we give the clear expectations as to what this thing is going to look like, and that we follow up and make sure that those the offender and the victim have done the follow through on how we repair harm. So there's a lot of other elements to restorative practices than circles. So I just wanted to make that point also.
Well, and when we talked before, you mentioned about how you would have an opportunity for families to come together in the school and break bread.
That's right. That's right. At the end of it all, that's what you do. At the end of it all, we sit around and we break bread, and food brings us all together. That's one thing that we love to do, that we share in common.
All right. Thank you. Rob, anything else you wanted to add with regards to how it would affect and benefit your students and families?
Well, definitely. I feel like restorative practices helps everyone involved to build on really important skills, accepting responsibility, forgiveness, mutual forgiveness, seeing another person's point of view, improving listening skills. If we can help our students with that, we're placing that child back into the home with those skills under development, and that can only help just the atmosphere at home, but the atmosphere in school. And I also think that once, like Doreen had mentioned, sometimes it helps to have a third party involved when those kinds of things, and we give people the opportunity to come to a mutual understanding and move forward with it. So teachers are acquiring the skills, the students are acquiring those skills. And like I said, it's the kind of thing that really helps to build community within the school and beyond.
Thanks, Rob. And Latrinda, I'm going to ask you to come in and help with the Q&A, because I thought I had some and then I lost them, and I just need your help, and I'm calling for it.
No worries at all. Give me.
Oh, there it is. I found it. Okay. No, I saw it, then the box disappeared, and I didn't know where the box went to. Excuse me in all my professionalism. Are these programs evidence-based? And is there a reason why police are directly involved and not mental health professionals? And I'm not sure if one of the officers wanted to take that. Because what I'll do is I'll just jump in and say, right now, we're just beginning this process, especially with police.
I'll say something about this too.
Okay, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, sure. I think it is evidence-based, and there are a number of diversionary programs across the country, as well as some that we've already learned about here in Pittsburgh. And there's going to be a pilot by Pittsburgh Police on the north side for an adult diversion program, rather than rearresting people who are committing crimes that are related to the fact that they're homeless or living in poverty. I think that Chief Bethel gave us a lot of the evidence to say that it is evidence-based, at least in Philadelphia. There are incidents in our schools and outside of our schools, some serious altercations, some serious incidents that do require, the assistance of police. And there also, there's a number of reasons why police might be somewhere. Now, there's obviously and I saw Mr. Jordan's comment also in the chat. The idea is that the police officer is not then writing a citation, doing an arrest, showing up in front of a magistrate to explain what happened, or even, or the other horrific thing that is happening is that the child doesn't show up to the magistrate, and then they get another charge for, they get charged a fine and then a failure to pay the fine. We've learned about that too this year, that this cycle of, and my goodness, levying a several $100 fine on a child who, I mean, if you did that to me, it would bust up my, my paycheck to paycheck economics. It's a horrific thing to do that. The idea is that there are incidents that need to be quelled, and there are going to be involvement of security aides or police officers to quell something that's happening. There are kids that are afraid to come to school because of threats that they've received from peers. And they're glad that a police officer is there, and they're glad that somebody's around to stop something, that it gets started. What we want to be able to do is hand it off to social services. We don't want it to, the only pathway to be towards the magistrate. So there is going to be some police involvement. We want to end it early and get the professional social work, mental health services engaged if that's possible and if they're open. Restorative practices only works if there's something restored, and there has to be participation. Doreen Allen and others are so skilled at restorative practices. We need to expand it, but her experience and her gifts are that she is able to open up people to the idea that they have a choice, and that there is something that is more comforting and humane in their immediate future than the hostility that they're immersed in at the moment. And we need to be able to open up that pathway. It's not going to be easy. There's when it doesn't work, people close their minds to it, and they think that our schools are more disruptive because we're too soft. But we have to do this in order to have more opportunities for restoration and healing when incidents happen.
Thanks, Mr. Howman. Go ahead, LaTrinda. I'll step back now, but
Well, no, we have questions in a couple of different places. And so gonna go to the Q&A, and then some of the questions also coming up in the chat. So in the Q&A, right, it says to PFT leadership, when a teacher contacts you upset because charges were not filed or they are not happy with the punishment the student received, especially at the high school, what is your stance? How do you educate your members?
Well, what happens usually is we try to counsel them to let them know and understand that sometimes they have to look at the situation a little different, and just because they're upset at that moment and they may want something more for the student, that it probably won't happen. And we always give them an opportunity to step back and reflect. And usually they'll come back and say, you know what, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm overreacting, or I'm upset about something. So that's how we try to help our members. Bill, is there anything you wanted to add?
Well, could I add something? Because I want to say that's the beauty of the diversionary program, because sometimes I think teachers see that as a support, as wrong as it may be, because they want the student to get something that will change their actions, change their actions and get them some kind of help, because there isn't any other support for them. And the great thing about a diversionary program is it will give the students the supports they need. We don't have enough supports in our schools sometimes for the kids. And that's why we want these diversionary programs to provide more supports, more appropriate supports for our students to provide to help them before they need the negative supports. We need more positive supports in our schools to show our teachers that there are more positive supports available for our kids. And that's what we're looking for. We're always looking for more positive supports for our kids, so teachers and others don't think they have to have negative supports to change a student's behavior. We're looking for positive supports to help families and our students like that are available in community schools. That's why I'm excited about diversionary practices.
And I add also that part of restorative work is building a restorative staff community. And having your staff go through the training with Fidelity. We were one of 22 schools that began restorative work back in 2015. We had a coach and we had significant training from the International Institute of Restorative Practices. Our coach took us through 2 to 3 years worth of training, and we met on a regular basis. So it really does, your staff has to go through that training, and it can't be sidestepped. It can't be watered down. Our training lasted days, weeks, and then months, and then into years for us to get it right. So I think when you have calls like that, it's because it's not being done with fidelity. Those relationships have not been built on the ground where teachers feel like they can pull a student aside, have an impromptu conversation, or have a restorative conference where the teacher has support, the student has support, and then it can be hashed out. So I think those kind of calls are just calls where the training, I think, maybe, or the professional development is lacking, but I think it can be corrected.
And when I get a call like that here at the PFT office, just like every other human being, that person wants to tell their story about what their experience is. And they will get that opportunity with us for us to listen to what happened to them as an educator in their workplace, that they're upset enough that they feel that they're going to call the union office because they think something didn't go right. I mean, that's important to have an opportunity to do that. And it may be that, something not good happened to that educator, and maybe it was ignored, and that there does need to be something done. And it might, and often after a teacher explains it and we ask, well, what do you think should happen next? The answer is not, I think the student should be arrested. That's not the answer we get. What they want is, they want their classrooms to function, and they want to teach kids, and we know that kids are going to be disruptive at times. We want a successful way to guide students into better behavior, and to understand it too, not just to comply, but to understand it and to enjoy behaving better. Because I'll tell you what, I've had more success behaving better in my life than when I compare it to the times I didn't. And children learn that too along the way. So those calls usually turn out very well when an educator calls us.
Kevin, I'm interested. This was also sent here. How does that work in Philadelphia if a teacher, approaches, has a question about a complaint? Is there a process for that?
So just so you're aware, I mean, most of our offenses don't involve the teachers. So we're not doing, assault-based offenses against the teachers, because that, those are elevated offenses. So it's, assault moves up to a felony, and aggravated assault. And so our program doesn't capture that. So we don't get too much of that, but we actually are working on, and we're in the preliminary stages of developing a teacher-specific diversion, so that a teacher, we have the opportunity to make a decision. Oftentimes, they don't want to go to court. They, as is indicated, the next day, because what would invariably happen, a teacher would be going to get in the middle of a fight, catch an elbow, and they're frustrated and they're angry, the next day, there's a kind of a different feeling. And so we're looking at now to create a specific, a diversion for teachers, and the child would have to complete the program or be subjected to arrest, where we would notify the teacher as to what's going on. So we're in the preliminary stages of working that through the possibilities of that. So I'm just teeing that up. That's not something, but to your earlier question, we don't get that because much of the stuff that we were arresting kids were school safety based activity. The teachers, and so I'm gonna make a long-winded statement here, right? But when I came to the process, I was blaming teachers, and I was totally, absolutely ignorant and wrong. Yeah, I mean, I told people I'm like blaming everybody. I didn't even know what the system was. All I know, I'm getting these 1,600. It must be the teachers. When I got into the facts, it was my folks. It wasn't the teachers were taking so much. I mean, I applauded them. How much they were, not doing to the kids when they could have. But I think what happens invariably in the mistakes I described earlier, we don't do a good enough job. We say youth voice, which is big, administrator's voice, which is big. That teacher voice is equally as big. And so I think what happens sometimes we don't get their voice, and as a result, is sometimes they're just frustrated, like, why didn't you ask me? And so for our purposes, we don't. But as I move forward in this process, I would encourage anybody, that you just got to bring them to the table. They'll be more than willing to engage in the process. They just want to be included. And I think that's how you get to that next step. I mean, I think everybody in that tier wants to be respected, and know that their voice carries weight. Because I mean, my teachers were so frustrated at some points that they would go and file a private complaint. You know what I mean? Because no one was listening to them. You know what I mean? So you don't want to listen? I'll just go down to the police district and file my own report. And then 8 months later, I'm getting an arrest warrant for a kid because because they did that. And so really, it's really communication with that group is the key.
Awesome. I have a question here about the other schools, specifically that were mentioned in the grant that was discussed. And this is specifically for the PFT. What happened to the other schools that didn't get that restorative justice grant for the training? How were they included in the rest of the work?
Want me to take that, or do you guys?
Yeah, go ahead, Doreen. You probably,
Yeah, we had 22 schools randomly selected in the beginning. After the third year came around, and then the district began rolling restorative practices out to the rest of the schools in the district.
But all the schools, if they chose to, so there was the treatment group and then the placebo group, right? And so the schools that didn't have the support of, and Doreen can, identify the organization that does the IIR something. And anyway, they had support for the 22 treatment schools, and then the other schools could implement restorative practices. They just couldn't receive the support from that organization, but they could on their own, do what they need to do. And then there are, since then, some, and if you read our report and talk to Doreen, the school district needs to do more. We cannot squander this opportunity to have restorative practices part of the climate and culture of our school district. And that's what we're on the doorstep of doing. Because if we squander this, people become jaded, they think it doesn't work, and they won't hear you. So we have to invest in this now, because we did that study. We got the training, and now it's decaying over time. And we're losing the opportunity that we had. But read our report. We explain it a little bit nicer that in the report.
Another question here, it's specific to the charges. In Pittsburgh, is possession of a small amount of marijuana or disorderly conduct a charge that students get arrested for or are cited through the magisterial district court?
Bobak, you want to take that?
Yeah, I could take it. I believe it's a case-on-case basis. We were arresting kids in the beginning on small blunts. filled with marijuana, which really, why? We're not going to send that down to court, get the kid in the justice system for that. Now the school district has implicated a program, and this is on the end of, I think, the restored practice kind of program, that they actually have to, instead of be suspended for a long period of time, which was taking place, now they are only suspended for 3 to 5 days, I'm not sure. And then they have to go to a school, I believe it's at night or on weekends, and go through a drug and alcohol program. And if they complete that program, they're that nothing further happens. Once again, it's a case-to-case basis. Small amount of marijuana is under 30 grams in Pennsylvania. Obviously, if a kid comes in with 10 baggies individually wrapped, you can take that as a felony because it could be attempted distribute if it's under 30 grams. Disorderly conduct, same thing. It might be on a case-to-case basis. Obviously, we try to, if it's a 2-3 person fight in the school, I know a lot of the times on my end, I will say mediation first. If the kids and students involved want to participate in mediation with the services we have in the school, the counselors, the student services worker, and they can handle it at that end, then usually we have mediation and charges are not filed at the magistrate. There are alternatives than sending them to a magistrate. But not all the time. Like I said, it's usually on a case-to-case basis.
And then this is a question that has come through the Q&A. Do police need to physically be in school buildings, or can they be stationed elsewhere so they aren't roaming the hallways?
I believe you would have to direct that question to our chief of police. It's not a bad thing to have us in the buildings. I hope people would take the chance to get the opportunity to know why we're there. And when we're there, we care just as much as the next staff person. We go the extra mile. Sometimes it is the police officer who is the buffer between the teacher who feels she's not being heard, or administration who wants to pursue this child and nail him to the wall. It may be that police officer who engages on both ends. As he said, people want to be heard. We hear both sides or all three sides of the triangle. We can be that neutral ground to say, okay, we understand where you're coming from. I understand where you're coming from. How about we do this? We have to understand the students that we serve, first and foremost. Some of them are coming from backgrounds that, Lord, if I was a child again, I don't know where I would be at this point in time. These days, nowadays, it's hard for them. And we as educators, as police officers, as anyone that's in the realms of dealing with these children know that they should understand their student body. I believe that. So because we are in the schools, I'm glad we're coming to the table again, that we are being heard. You're hearing our voice. You want our perspective from our end, not from others' perspective. So just because we're in the schools, it's actually a good thing. And I can't wait till it all hashes out so you understand where we are as police officers. So again, I'm glad we're moving forward on this. And again, I can't stress it enough. I am elated and can't wait. So next question. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Davis.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
I'm just really passionate about what we do, and to be attacked and before people got to know us. Like, we go outside above and beyond. Some of us are coaches. We're in the community. I'm getting a little worked up.
No need. We
I'm gonna
hear
bring
you.
it down.
We all on the same side, and the basic, kind of core message is that we want to do better for our kids, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So
ma'am. Let's get the
5
party
o'clock.
started.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your participation and sharing your, your thoughts, your voice. This is just the beginning. We're just starting this conversation, as you all know. So looking forward to next steps, because it's going to take all of us. It's not just one entity. It's everybody has to be at the table to make this actually move forward, as Mr. Bethel had, on his diagram. All those different people that are part of that wheel is necessary. And so many of us have to jump off because there is another meeting that PPS is convening that is looking at reimagining school safety. And so I don't want to, delay you all from getting there. And I just wanted to say thank you. And I look forward to, having a conversation with you in the near future. For those that are panelists, I sent you the link. If you are able to jump on the debrief, please do so. And thank you, everybody, BGEA partners and people on the that are part of this conversation. Those that put information in the chat, thank you for your participation. And we'll be sending out the link to the recording as well as the notes and everything. We want everybody just to stay involved. So good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.